Imagine working late into the night, scrubbing floors in a towering corporate office, filled with people living the life you always dreamed of. Maria Alvarez was no stranger to hard work. Ever since she arrived in the United States, she knew the path ahead would be anything but smooth. Leaving behind a small village in Guatemala, where life moved at a slower pace, Maria had come to America carrying only a small suitcase and big dreams. Now, she stood in a vast corporate office tower in New York City, a world that felt as foreign as it was intimidating. It was night, and the building, once buzzing with business professionals, was now empty and silent. That was her cue. Armed with nothing more than a mop and a bucket, Maria began her nightly routine, scrubbing floors that gleamed with a wealth she could only dream of. But it wasn't the spotless surfaces or the towering glass windows that captured her attention. It was the rooms themselves, filled with ideas, conversations, and opportunities that seemed so close, yet impossibly far. Maria's nights often bled into each other. Cleaning, sweeping, mopping. It wasn't glamorous, but she took pride in doing her job well, always reminding herself that this was just the beginning. As she worked, she would pass by the remnants of the day. Forgotten whiteboards covered in complex strategies, empty coffee cups from late-night brainstorming sessions, and files left open on desks, filled with words like profit margins, market trends, and projected growth. Terms that seemed cryptic at first, but soon started to paint a clearer picture in Maria's mind. She didn't fully grasp their meaning, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever they were talking about in these rooms was important, and that made her curious. Every glance she took at these details felt like a small rebellion, a quiet declaration that she wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was more. Even though Maria's body ached from long hours of physical labor, her mind remained sharp. As she polished conference tables and emptied trash cans, she would replay snippets of conversations she'd overheard, piecing them together like a puzzle. Phrases like capital investment and market leverage began to blend in with the rhythm of her work, filling her nights with a different kind of purpose. The more she listened, the more she understood. These words were the foundation of the corporate world, a world that seemed built on a different kind of wealth and power. There was something both exciting and terrifying about it, but Maria couldn't ignore the thrill of it all. It was like peering through a keyhole into a secret world she wasn't supposed to be a part of. One particular night, she found herself lingering a little longer near a conference room. The meeting had ended hours ago, but the echo of the executives' discussion still lingered in the air. They had talked about a new investment, the comeback strategy for a faltering department, and something called outsourcing that could save the company a lot of money. Maria's fingers tightened around the handle of her mop. Outsourcing? It sounded like another cold business term, one that could change her life without her even knowing it. She shook off the feeling and continued working, but the words clung to her thoughts like an unwelcome guest. As the weeks went by, Maria realized she was becoming more than just a silent observer. She was learning. Her shifts became a sort of unintentional education in business strategies, each night revealing a little more of how the corporate market really worked. Yet, she kept her discoveries to herself, storing them away like precious gems, uncertain if or when she'd ever need them. But there was something brewing inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name, a flicker of hope, ambition, whatever it was. It made the long, lonely hours seem less burdensome. Maybe, just maybe, these exciting things she was overhearing would lead to something more than sore muscles and minimum wage. Still, Maria knew she was walking a fine line. She was privy to information that wasn't meant for her. What would happen if someone caught her listening, even by accident? She couldn't risk losing this job. It was the apartment rent, the car payments, the means to send money back home to her family. Everything depended on her staying invisible. Yet, the temptation to understand more, to see beyond her role, grew stronger each night. She began to wonder if there was a way out of the shadows, out of the suffering, the endless cycle of work, sleep, repeat. But for now, it was just a quiet thought she kept tucked away, safe from the harsh reality of her day-to-day struggles. One evening, Maria was scrubbing the hallway just outside the executive lounge when a heated argument broke out behind closed doors. The voices were muffled, but she could make out snippets. Market crash, risk mitigation, another strategy failure. Her ears perked up. They sounded desperate. Desperation meant there was drama, and where there was drama, there was a story, one that Maria found herself deeply invested in. It was strange. She wasn't part of their world, yet she felt drawn to it, almost protective of these unseen players and their comeback. As the conversation ended, she quickly moved away, feigning indifference. But inside, her thoughts were racing. Why did she care so much? Why did these words and strategies matter to her? Maria tried to shake off the growing obsession, reminding herself that she was just a janitor. But deep down, something told her otherwise. Maybe it was her mind, always searching for patterns and connections, or maybe it was the stubborn flicker of hope that refused to die out. She started carrying a small notebook in her pocket, jotting down key phrases she heard, doodling charts and ideas that made sense only to her. It was silly, she knew. What could a janitor possibly do with corporate strategies? But writing it down made it real. Made her feel like she was a part of something exciting, even if only in her own head. It wasn't long before Maria's secret studies started to pay off in unexpected ways. She began to see patterns in the company's operations, predicting which departments were struggling, which executives were under pressure. It was like watching a play unfold, each player acting out their part, with Maria silently observing from the wings. And with each new revelation, her confidence grew. Maybe she didn't belong in these high-powered offices, but that didn't mean she couldn't understand them. The mind was a powerful tool, after all, and Maria was learning how to wield it in ways she never thought possible. But knowledge was a double-edged sword. The more Maria learned, the more dissatisfied she felt. Cleaning luxury cars and spotless apartments for people who didn't even know her name. It started to feel suffocating. Was this really her life? The dream she had crossed borders for? Yet every time she thought of quitting, something held her back. There was a bigger picture here. She was sure of it. Something she hadn't uncovered yet. And until she did, she couldn't walk away. So she kept cleaning, kept listening, kept absorbing, waiting for the moment when all these seemingly random pieces would click together into a bigger, clearer plan. Then one day, Maria noticed a small change. The company was abuzz with whispers of a new acquisition. The employees were tense, the atmosphere charged with a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Something big was about to happen. Maria found herself caught in the whirlwind, eager and afraid all at once. But amidst the chaos, a thought crystallized in her mind. What if she could use this knowledge, these insights, to change her own life? What if she took everything she'd learned about wealth, money, and power plays and applied it to something of her own? The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning, sending shivers down her spine. Suddenly, the mind-numbing routine didn't feel so futile. For the first time, she wasn't just eavesdropping, she was strategizing. An idea was taking shape, fragile but full of potential. Could a janitor, a nobody, really build something of her own in this cutthroat world? The very thought was almost laughable. But as she looked out at the glittering city lights from the 30th floor window, Maria knew one thing. She was tired of cleaning other people's houses. Maybe it was time to build one of her own. A place where she wouldn't just be a spectator, but a player, a contender in the market of dreams. One night, after another exhausting shift, Maria found herself lingering outside a conference room door longer than usual. The voices inside were raised, filled with tension and urgency. She leaned closer, catching phrases like outsourcing the cleaning services and reducing overhead costs. It took her a moment to process what they were saying, and when it hit her, her heart sank. Outsourcing the cleaning services? That meant fewer contracts, fewer jobs. People like her, friends and family, could lose their livelihoods. Maria gripped her mop tighter, a mix of fear and defiance flaring up inside her. But as the conversation continued, something shifted. They spoke about inefficiencies, about how the current cleaning company lacked certain market strategies. It wasn't about replacing workers. It was about finding someone who could run things better. And then just like that, an idea sparked in Maria's mind. Could she be that someone? The thought seemed absurd at first. Who was she to even think she could run a business? She was just a janitor, a nobody in the eyes of these corporate giants. But the more she mulled it over, the more it made sense. She had spent years listening in, soaking up business jargon, learning about profit margins and growth strategies from the very best. Unintentionally, perhaps, but effectively. She knew what went wrong, what corners were cut, and where value could be added. If anyone could turn around a struggling cleaning company, maybe it was her. Still, doubts clawed at her mind. Could she really pull it off? It would mean stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight, putting everything on the line for a dream that might crumble before it even began. Yet, the fire was lit. That very night, Maria went home and stayed up until dawn, sketching out a rough business plan on a stack of old napkins. She mapped out what services she could offer, how she would position herself in the market, and which of her friends and relatives might want to join her. It was crude, far from perfect, but it was a start. She scribbled down words like efficiency, scalability, and value proposition, smiling at how those once foreign terms now flowed naturally from her pen. By the time the sun rose, she felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just cleaning up after others. She was building something of her own. Over the next few weeks, Maria began to put her plan into action. Starting small and cautiously, she took on side jobs, cleaning private houses and small businesses on the weekends. Her meticulous attention to detail, combined with a newfound entrepreneurial spirit, quickly earned her a reputation. Slowly, she saved up enough to hire a few trusted friends. People she knew would work as hard as she did. They were all from the same background, struggling to make ends meet, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to get by. Together, they pooled their resources, investing in better equipment and a small office space, a modest apartment turned headquarters. It wasn't easy. There were times when they barely made rent, times when a broken-down car or a missed payment felt like the end of the world. But through every setback, Maria pushed forward, driven by the thought that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about providing for her family, about proving to herself and to everyone who doubted her that she was more than just a woman with a mop. Slowly, word spread. Maria's cleaning service wasn't just another under-the-radar operation. It was professional, reliable, and above all, run with a mind that understood what the corporate world needed. She wasn't just cleaning, she was solving problems, improving efficiency, and saving companies money. Her big break came when one of the small businesses she serviced recommended her to a larger client. Ironically, the very same corporate office where she used to work. Maria couldn't believe it when she received the call. A chance to bid on a contract that big? It seemed too good to be true. But she seized the opportunity with everything she had. Spending sleepless nights perfecting her proposal, she included everything she'd learned, highlighting strategies that would optimize costs without compromising on quality. And when the day of the meeting finally arrived, Maria stepped into the boardroom, not as a janitor, but as a businesswoman. Standing before the very executives she used to silently observe, Maria presented her plan with a calm confidence that surprised even herself. There was no sign of the woman who once mopped floors here. Instead, they saw a sharp, articulate entrepreneur who understood their pain points and knew exactly how to address them. As she spoke, the tension in the room shifted. The looks of skepticism melted away, replaced by nods of agreement and finally, something akin to respect. When the contract was offered to her, Maria felt a surge of triumph unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She'd done it. She'd turned a janitor's dream into a viable business, one that was now competing in the very market she used to watch from the sidelines. The thrill of success was almost overwhelming, but with it came new challenges. Maria's business was no longer just a small operation. It was growing, attracting attention from bigger clients, and inevitably, from competitors. Every day felt like a battle to prove herself, to show that her comeback wasn't just a fluke. Some of the older, more established cleaning companies began to spread rumors, questioning her ethics, accusing her of using inside information to get ahead. Maria knew it wasn't true, but the allegations stung. She had built this business from the ground up, through hard work and determination. But in the cutthroat world of business, perception often mattered more than reality. Determined not to let the negativity drag her down, Maria pushed forward, focusing on expanding her client base and refining her service offerings. She introduced new cleaning technologies, streamlined her processes, and even ventured into eco-friendly solutions, setting her apart from her competitors. The market was tough, and every victory came with a price. Longer hours, more stress, and the constant fear of failure. But every time she felt like giving up, she remembered the nights she'd spent cleaning offices in silence, dreaming of this very moment. She hadn't come this far to quit now. As her business continued to grow, so did the demands on her time and energy. There were days when Maria barely slept, juggling contracts, managing employees, and trying to stay ahead of the ever-changing corporate landscape. But through it all, she remained steadfast, her mind sharp and focused. Every success story, every satisfied client was a reminder of how far she'd come. She could afford a better house now, a nicer car. But more than that, she was creating jobs, giving others the same opportunity that had once seemed so impossible for her. Yet, with success came isolation. Maria found herself drifting away from the people who had been there at the start, friends, family members, who didn't quite understand the pressures she faced. Her once close-knit circle seemed to shrink with every new contract signed, and as her business grew, so did the gap between her and the community she had once been a part of. The very people she wanted to uplift began to see her differently. She was no longer just Maria, the hard-working immigrant. She was Maria, the businesswoman, the one who'd made it. It was a compliment, but it felt like a weight. The tipping point came when a major corporation approached her with an offer to buy her company. It was a life-changing sum, enough to set her up for life. But as Maria sat across from their representatives, listening to them talk about wealth, acquisition strategies, and future profits, something inside her shifted. This was what she'd been striving for, wasn't it? The money, the success? But why did it feel so hollow? As they outlined their vision for her company, how they'd restructure, cut costs, and optimize the workforce, Maria realized what selling would mean. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the people who had believed in her, who had worked tirelessly to build this business. Selling out would mean betraying them and herself. So she made a decision. She stood up, thanked them politely, and walked away from the deal. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the purpose behind it. Maria knew she could build something far greater on her own terms. As she stepped out of the boardroom, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in months. The next chapter of her story was just beginning, and this time, it would be written entirely by her. Maria's business was thriving, and with every new contract, her reputation grew. But success came with unexpected burdens. She was no longer a faceless janitor blending into the background. She was a business owner making waves in the industry, and with that visibility came scrutiny. One day, she received an anonymous tip that a few of her competitors were planning to bring her down. They claimed that she had exploited her previous role as a janitor to gain insider information, using it unfairly to win contracts. It was an accusation she'd feared ever since she took her first steps into the business world. But hearing it out loud, seeing it in writing, it stung deeply. How could they twist her hard work and perseverance into something ugly? She had built this company brick by brick, through sweat and sleepless nights, without any shortcuts. And yet, here she was, on the brink of losing it all over lies. The tension boiled over when she confronted one of her fiercest competitors at a local business forum. "You think you can waltz in and steal our market?" the man sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "We've been in this business for decades. You're just a janitor who got lucky." Maria's fists clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I earned every contract I've signed," she replied evenly, refusing to back down. "If you're so threatened by a janitor, maybe you're the one who needs to rethink your strategies." Her words hung in the air, a sharp challenge that sent murmurs through the room. But inside, she was shaken. Was this how they all saw her? As an outsider, a fraud who didn't belong? No matter how successful she became, would she always be viewed as just a woman who dared to play in the big leagues? The doubts gnawed at her. Was she fooling herself by thinking she could compete on this level? And yet, the idea of quitting felt unbearable. She had people depending on her now, employees who had taken a risk to work for her, believing in her vision. If she gave up, what would that say to them? But the pressure was mounting. Everywhere she turned, there were whispers and suspicious glances. The more contracts she won, the louder the murmurs of disapproval grew. People began questioning her methods, spreading rumors that she was undercutting prices, breaking rules, doing whatever it took to get ahead. It wasn't true, but the damage was done. Her once celebrated comeback was turning into a story of scandal. One night, after a particularly brutal day filled with tense meetings and hostile negotiations, Maria sat alone in her office, staring blankly at the city lights outside. She felt trapped, cornered by forces beyond her control. She had worked so hard to rise above the suffering of her past, only to find herself isolated, mistrusted, and misunderstood. Tears stung her eyes as she thought of everything she'd sacrificed. The long hours, the missed family gatherings, the friendships that had withered away, all for what? To be torn down by people who couldn't see past her beginnings? She buried her face in her hands, the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong in this market, in this world of wealth and power. But then she thought of her team, the people who stood by her, who believed in her even when she struggled to believe in herself. She thought of their faces, their stories, their hopes. They weren't just employees. They were family, bound not by blood, but by the shared struggle to carve out a better life. How could she let them down now? Wiping her tears, Maria took a deep breath. No, she wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. She would fight, not just for her business, but for the people who had helped her build it. If they wanted to see what a janitor turned businesswoman was truly capable of, she would show them. But the universe seemed determined to test her resolve. A few weeks later, a major corporation approached her with an offer to buy out her company. The sum was staggering. More money than she'd ever imagined seeing in her lifetime. It would solve everything, silence her critics, and set her up for life. She could leave behind the stress, the drama, the constant battle for respect. But as the representative laid out the terms, how they planned to downsize, streamline, and optimize her workforce, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. They weren't just buying her company, they were dismantling it. The jobs she'd created, the community she'd built, it would all be swept away in the name of efficiency. Think of the wealth, the representative urged, mistaking her silence for hesitation. You'll never have to worry about money again. You can buy any house, any car you want. Isn't that why you started this company in the first place? Maria stared at him, her mind racing. Was that why she'd started? Hadn't she dreamed of escaping poverty, of creating a life where she didn't have to scrape by? But somewhere along the way, it had become about more than just money. It was about the people, the stories, the hope she'd brought to others like her. Selling out would mean betraying everything she stood for. No, she said quietly, shaking her head. The representative blinked, clearly stunned. Excuse me? Maria met his gaze, her voice steady. I'm not selling. My company is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's people. It's purpose. And you can't put a price on that. The silence that followed was deafening. The representative's face tightened in frustration, but Maria didn't care. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She stood firm as he tried to convince her, offering more money, promising her the world. But her answer remained the same. This wasn't about wealth. It was about staying true to herself. The fallout was immediate. News of her decisions spread quickly, and not all of it was positive. Some called her foolish, a woman too naive to understand the rules of business. Others accused her of being stubborn, letting pride get in the way of progress. But Maria held her head high, refusing to let their words shake her resolve. She hadn't come this far to be bought out, to have her dream turned into just another cog in the corporate machine. She had fought for this comeback, bled for it, and she would protect it, no matter the cost. The backlash was fierce. Clients pulled out, investors got cold feet, and the market turned hostile. But Maria stood her ground, doubling down on what made her business unique. She focused on her employees, ensuring they felt valued and heard. She reached out to the community, offering jobs and training to those who needed a second chance. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The people who mattered, the workers, the dreamers, the underdogs, rallied behind her. They saw what the corporate world didn't, a leader who refused to sacrifice her principles for profit. And then, just when it seemed like she might finally catch a break, another blow landed. One of her closest friends, someone she had trusted implicitly, turned against her, selling company secrets to a rival. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss. This was someone who had stood beside her during the toughest times, who had shared her vision. The hurt was almost unbearable. How could she go on, knowing that even those closest to her couldn't be trusted? For a moment, Maria felt the fight drain out of her. Maybe this was it, the moment when everything truly fell apart. But as she stood in her empty office, staring at the place where her dreams had taken root, she made a choice. She wouldn't let this break her. Betrayal, failure, setbacks. They were all part of the story, and her story wasn't over yet. She would rebuild, even if it took everything she had, because that was what comebacks were made of. Resilience, determination, and a refusal to let the world define who you were. So with a weary smile, Maria rolled up her sleeves and got back to work, more determined than ever to prove that sometimes the greatest wealth is the strength to keep going. The fallout from the betrayal left Maria reeling. Every time she walked into her office, she felt the emptiness of the space around her, a constant reminder of those who had walked away and those who had turned against her. She knew that rebuilding her company wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was hard to regain, and in the cutthroat world of business, weakness was a scent that drew predators. But even as some clients abandoned her and competitors tried to poach her remaining employees, Maria held her ground. It wasn't pride that kept her going. It was resolve. She owed it to the people who still believed in her, the ones who stood by her even when everything seemed to be falling apart. For them, she would rebuild. The first step was to assess the damage. As Maria sifted through reports, spreadsheets, and contracts, she realized just how precarious her situation was. She had lost key accounts, leaving a significant gap in her revenue. It would take a miracle to stay afloat, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she'd made the right decision turning down the buyout. What if she had sold? She could be living comfortably in a new house, driving a luxury car, and watching the chaos from the sidelines. But then she shook her head, clearing the thought away. No. Selling out wasn't the answer. If she had taken the money, she would have lost something far more valuable. Her identity. There was no wealth in compromising her integrity, but the struggles kept coming. One by one, her investors began to pull their support, citing concerns about the company's future. Maria felt each loss like a punch to the gut, but she refused to let it show. She would smile, thank them politely, and then retreat to her office, where she would spend hours poring over strategies to keep the company afloat. She cut her own salary to pay her workers, dipped into her personal savings to cover expenses, and even sold her apartment to raise emergency funds. Every sacrifice was a reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just the business, but the people who depended on her. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of it all pressed down harder. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Maria found herself back at the place where it all began. The towering office building she used to clean. She hadn't been here since she won the original contract. And standing there now, she felt a strange sense of nostalgia. This was where her journey had started, where she had first dared to dream of something greater. As she walked through the empty halls, she could almost see her younger self, mopping the floors, listening in on meetings, clinging to hope in the midst of exhaustion. And now here she was again, standing at a crossroads. Had she come full circle? Or was this just another beginning? The memories washed over her, of the mind-numbing routine, of sleepless nights and calloused hands. But more than that, she remembered the determination, the hunger to prove herself. She had been underestimated then, just as she was being underestimated now. They thought she would fold, crumble under the pressure. But they didn't know her. Maria didn't know how to give up. So she stood a little taller, shoulders squared, and took a deep breath. She wasn't just going to survive this storm. She was going to come out stronger on the other side. And she wasn't alone. One by one, her remaining employees began to step forward, pledging their support. "We believe in you, Maria," one of them said quietly, a young woman who had joined the company when it was still just a handful of people. "You've given us more than just jobs. You've given us hope." Maria's throat tightened at the words, emotions she had kept locked away threatening to spill over. This wasn't just a business to them. It was a lifeline, a chance to rise above their circumstances. These weren't just workers, they were family, and Maria would do everything in her power to protect them. So they got to work. Together, they restructured the company from the ground up, focusing on what made them unique. Personalized service, a strong community presence, and an unwavering commitment to integrity. Maria reached out to old clients, apologizing for the turmoil and asking for another chance. To her surprise, some of them agreed. "We remember what you did for us," one client said, his tone warm. "You helped us when no one else would. We haven't forgotten." It was a small victory, but it was enough to reignite the spark of hope in Maria's heart. But the path to recovery was long and filled with obstacles. Every time they seemed to gain ground, something else would knock them back. A lost contract, a broken piece of equipment, another smear campaign from her competitors. Maria's resilience was tested again and again. There were moments when she felt like screaming, moments when she wanted to throw in the towel and walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she would take a deep breath, remind herself of why she started, and push through the pain. Suffering, she knew, was a part of every comeback. And the greatest wealth was the strength to endure. Then came a breakthrough. One of her former clients, a mid-sized tech firm, was expanding rapidly and needed a reliable cleaning service to handle their new facilities. It was a huge opportunity, one that could turn everything around. But there was a catch. The contract required a significant upfront investment for new equipment and personnel. Maria didn't have the capital. She had poured everything she had into keeping the company afloat. But giving up on this deal would mean letting go of the lifeline they desperately needed. For days, she wrestled with the decision. Should she take the risk, knowing that failure could mean the end of everything? Or should she play it safe and watch as the opportunity slipped through her fingers? Finally, she called a meeting with her team. "I won't make this decision alone," she told them, voice steady but eyes filled with uncertainty. "This company belongs to all of us. If we do this, we do it together." There was a moment of silence, and then, slowly, one by one, her employees nodded. "We're with you," someone said softly. Maria felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just a business anymore. It was a movement, a testament to their shared resilience. With a deep breath, Maria took the plunge. She reached out to every contact she had, pulled every string, and somehow, against all odds, scraped together enough funds to secure the contract. And as they signed the deal, Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about the money, it was about proving that they could bounce back, that they could weather any storm. But more than that, it was about reclaiming their story. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters, innovators, and above all, a team. Slowly, the tide began to turn. With the new contract in hand, Maria's company started to regain its footing. Clients began to return, drawn by the story of a business that refused to be broken. The smear campaigns lost their sting, and even her most vocal critics began to acknowledge her resilience. It wasn't a rapid recovery, but it was steady. And as they grew, Maria made sure to reinvest in the community, creating jobs, offering training programs, and mentoring other small business owners who were struggling to find their place in the market. She wasn't just building a company, she was building a legacy. But the scars remained. Every decision, every victory, came with the shadow of the battles she had fought. Maria had changed. She was stronger, wiser, but also more guarded. The cost of ambition, she realized, wasn't just money. It was a piece of herself, a piece of the innocence she had once carried. But as she looked around at the team she had rebuilt, at the lives she had touched, she knew one thing for certain. It had all been worth it. Because in the end, true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or assets. It was measured in the impact you left behind, the story you created, the hope you inspired, and the people who stood by you, even when the world tried to tear you down. With time, Maria's company not only regained its footing but began to thrive like never before. The journey had reshaped her vision of success, teaching her that true wealth was not just about money, houses, or cars. It was about impact, about using her story to lift others up. She wasn't just a businesswoman anymore. She was a leader, a mentor, and a symbol of resilience for her community. Her office, once a humble apartment turned headquarters, was now a buzzing hub of activity, filled with people who shared her vision. They weren't just cleaning floors. They were building futures. And Maria, the woman who had started as a janitor, was at the helm, guiding them with the same humility and determination that had fueled her rise. Every morning, Maria would walk through the office, greeting each team member by name, asking about their families, their goals. She had learned through her own suffering that success meant nothing if it left others behind. That's why she implemented profit-sharing programs, ensuring that everyone, from the entry-level workers to the managerial staff, benefited from the company's growth. The result was a team that felt valued, connected, and fiercely loyal. They weren't just working for a paycheck. They were building something greater, something that would last beyond any one person's lifetime. It wasn't just about cleaning buildings. It was about cleaning away the barriers that kept people like them from reaching their full potential. As the company expanded, Maria began to hire more from within the community. Single mothers, immigrants, people struggling to find stable employment. She partnered with local organizations to provide training and mentorship, helping people develop skills that could lead to better opportunities. It wasn't just about growing her business anymore. It was about growing her community. "We're not just creating jobs," she would say at team meetings, her voice steady and warm. "We're creating futures." And that vision resonated deeply with her employees. They weren't just part of a business. They were part of a movement, a comeback story that proved that anyone, no matter how humble their beginnings, could achieve greatness. The change didn't go unnoticed. Maria began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, to share her story with audiences ranging from aspiring entrepreneurs to seasoned CEOs. She would stand on stage, looking out at a sea of faces, and tell them about the janitor who dreamed bigger than her circumstances. "Success isn't about where you start," she would say, her eyes bright with conviction. "It's about where you choose to go, and how you lift others as you rise." The applause would be thunderous, but it wasn't the recognition she cared about. It was the hope she saw flicker in the eyes of the underdogs in the crowd, the ones who felt out of place, unseen, just like she once had. They weren't just hearing a speech, they were seeing a reflection of what was possible. But even as the accolades poured in, Maria never lost sight of her roots. She continued to work closely with her team, rolling up her sleeves and getting her hands dirty whenever she could. She would visit job sites, offer encouragement, and remind her employees that no matter how high they climbed, they should never forget where they came from. It was this grounded approach that endeared her to her workers and clients alike. She wasn't just a CEO in a house on a hill. She was one of them, someone who understood what it meant to struggle, to sacrifice, to fight for every inch of progress. That authenticity became her company's greatest asset, setting them apart in a crowded market. As the years went by, Maria's company grew into a regional powerhouse, respected not just for its services, but for its values. She expanded into new cities, opening branches that brought jobs and hope to other struggling communities. Each new office was more than just a business venture. It was a statement. We belong here. We deserve to thrive. And every employee, from the janitors to the managers, carried that message with pride. They weren't just representing a company. They were representing a new way of thinking about success, one that measured wealth not just in profits, but in lives changed. But Maria's greatest triumph came when she was approached by the very corporation that had once offered to buy her out. They were struggling now, their ruthless cost-cutting strategies having backfired, and they needed a partner who could help them rebuild. The irony wasn't lost on Maria, as she sat across from the same executives who had once dismissed her as a minor player. They spoke of collaboration, of strategic alliances, but Maria didn't gloat. She listened, nodded thoughtfully, and then made a counteroffer. Not to merge, but to mentor. "I'm not interested in just fixing your business," she said calmly. "I want to help you build something better. Something that treats people as assets, not expenses." It was a bold move, but it paid off. The corporation accepted, and under Maria's guidance, they began to rebuild with integrity and empathy at the core of their operations. The partnership was a turning point, not just for the company, but for Maria's legacy. She wasn't just the woman who had defied the odds. She was a visionary leader who was redefining what it meant to be successful in a world obsessed with money and power. Her story was featured in major publications, her face gracing the covers of business magazines, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a beacon of hope. And every time she was asked how she had done it, she would smile and say, "By remembering that people matter more than profits." In the end, Maria's true success wasn't measured in the size of her bank account or the number of contracts she held. It was in the lives she touched. The single mother who became a supervisor, the immigrant who started his own business after learning the ropes under her guidance, the young man who found purpose and hope through a job that gave him more than just a paycheck. Her wealth was in their stories, in the comebacks they made, inspired by hers. And every so often, Maria would take a moment to look back on her journey. From the nights scrubbing floors in silence, to the days spent building an empire that stood for something more than just money. She would think of all the times she almost gave up, of the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the relentless climb against impossible odds. And then she would smile, a quiet, contented smile. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving herself to others. It was about proving to herself that she was worthy, that she belonged, that she could build something lasting. Now, as she stood in front of her team, looking out at the faces of people she had lifted and empowered, Maria felt a sense of peace. She had created something beautiful, something that would outlive her. And as the applause filled the room, she took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This was her story, a story of resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what you gain, but what you give. And that, in the end, was the kind of success that truly mattered. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, transformation, and hope, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There are so many incredible journeys waiting to be shared, and I don't want you to miss a single one.